by the Keating Five, the 5 U.S. senators. We refused to give in to that pressure, but our eventual bosses in Washington gave in. I really need to mention Ed Gray, who was the head of the agency during this period of re-regulation, who came from Southern California, staunchest conceivable Reagan Republican, and had a road to Damascus experience. The Justice Department under President Reagan threatened to indict him for closing too many insolvent savings and loans. Have we had that problem recently with our regulators? Overly aggressive at closing insolvent banks or savings and loans? No. Gray also, and you know, at the top, and we in the trenches, put together a real program of going and supporting criminal prosecutions. And it led to the felony convictions of over 1,000 senior insiders. There are only 3,000 savings and loans. So that was about the greatest success ever. And we went after places like Lincoln while they were still reporting record profits. We didn't wait till they were admitting that they were deeply insolvent many years later. Have you seen that happening recently? No. The Justice Department didn't even begin to investigate the large lenders, non-prime lenders, until spring of 2007, after the entire secondary market in non-prime had already collapsed. And there have been 0 indictments since then.
So there's no regulators. What about the FBI, and what about the law? Is the law still extant? I mean, is there something that they've crossed a line massively? Trillions of dollars have gone south. The taxpayers had to ladle all this money into this black hole.
Well, to give you an example, I'm a serial whistleblower. You know, so I got to testify against the Keating Five, testify against Speaker Wright. There are probably folks in the audience who remember him. He went to bat for the worst frauds in Texas. Got 2 presidential appointees of my agency to resign in disgrace. And got our head of supervision through our congressional testimony demoted about 7 levels. Well, 17 years later, he was promoted by the current Office of Thrift Supervision to be the prime regulator for all of California for IndyMac, Washington Mutual, Downey, Countrywide, you name it. So they put in charge the worst conceivable folks. They took all the lessons we had learned painfully in the savings and loan debacle and put a negative sign in front of it and did the opposite. The FBI started out really well with this warning in September 2004 that there was an epidemic of mortgage fraud. What happened is that in response to the 9/11 attacks, and you can understand why they would do this, they transferred 500 FBI agents who specialized in white-collar crime to national security. Because you can't infiltrate Al-Qaeda, but you can follow the money. Okay, so that's perfectly sensible. But they refused to allow the FBI to replace the lost agents. And that's insane.
And has anything changed?
It got worse. As people here recall, I imagine, that there were these things called Enron and WorldCom. You may recall that Enron happened almost exactly the same time as 9/11. And that WorldCom is 2002, and those whole series of failures go on through 2003 with lots and lots of these major frauds. Well, there's a lag, obviously, it takes time to make a big case against Enron. There were 100 FBI agents working on Enron alone. So when are they actually going to trial on these cases? Well, 2005, 2006. So you've already lost 500 FBI agents. What are you going to do? You're going to take the great bulk of your FBI agents and try to win the Enron case, right? And WorldCom. So you're going to assign most of your FBI talent there. And which of us, you know, we're going to prosecute the enormous case against Ken Lay of Enron. Are we going to pick the best FBI agents? Of course we are. So it's not polite, but you know that it was the second and third string left right, to deal with the mortgage fraud. And there were trivial numbers of them left anyway. So they didn't go after the choke points. We understood we didn't have remotely enough resources in the savings loan crisis either, of course, but we understood that we had to go for the Achilles heel. So we triaged, to borrow another medical term, and we took the absolute worst major frauds. And we also passed a rule restricting growth because we knew these were Ponzi schemes. And if you restrict growth, Ponzi schemes die. So even the ones we couldn't get to and close, they were killed by it. The equivalent here, well, you just saw it in the slide. What's the obvious choke point, the obvious Achilles heel? The rating agencies. There are only 3 of them. Would give me 20 good examiners. And I could have shut down any of those rating agencies. Because they were doing this. And that'd be the first question you'd ask. Okay, so what do you do to evaluate credit risk? Now, obviously, you look at a sample of the loan files. Long silence. Well, no, actually, we don't do that. Well, then actually, you're going to stop business today. I mean, that would have been the reaction. So they didn't do that. Instead, they viewed it as a retail-type crime instead of wholesale. There are 62,000 criminal referrals last fiscal year for mortgage fraud. And there were roughly 150 FBI agents. What's going to happen? Right? It's throwing sand into the ocean in those circumstances, unless you use them to target WAMU countrywide and such, and they didn't do that. And you know what the worst news is? Only regulated institutions file criminal referrals, and 80% of the loans were made by non-regulated institutions. So the 62,000 number doesn't come close to talking about the real numbers. So the FBI was simply run over. It, became roadkill.
Well, a lot of inquiring minds want to know why it is that Obama is rescuing these people who have brought the global economy to the brink of collapse, and why this sleight of hand continues with Geithner and Summers declaring them all healthy, and then the banks, of course, make a big deal about paying back their TARP money. And it is such flagrant sleight of hand because these toxic assets are still there. They just don't talk about them.
Well, then they don't exist, right?
Well, I thought there was something inexorable about it.
Haven't you ever had a 5-month-old and hidden something under a blanket? It doesn't work once they hit about 8 months, unfortunately.
Right. But let's try and figure out what is going on with Obama. Why do, at this moment, when you could clean house, all this money is going to prop up these discredited institutions, which actually is making them stronger, and they're going to suck more and more money out. There's not going to be any money to reinvent the economy. All this stuff about green shoots and losing our dependence and Silicon Valley and all of the hope that was there in the election hype, that's not going to happen.
Because Obama's primary economic advice comes from people who helped create the crisis. And as long as you get your advice from people that don't want to admit that they were wrong about essentially everything they did in their professional lives and that they have no useful skills because all they know is stuff that was proved to be false, I mean, you're just not going to get professors of economics who are 60 years old to stand up and say, I'm sorry, everything I taught, every policy I implemented was completely wrong. The economic theories I followed were completely wrong, and I have no useful knowledge, and I'm sorry. It's not going to happen. And if they did, why would anyone ever hire them again for anything, right? They have no meaningful skills. That's the position of Summers.
Yeah, but Obama's whole political lifeline is whether he can turn this thing around in a couple of years' time. Otherwise, you can see that the people like Dick Cheney and you've got Limbaugh wanting him to fail. They're waiting in the wings to see this whole thing crash and burn. So he's on the tightrope So why is he listening to these people if there's an alternative? And indeed, tell us what the alternative is, because
Well, first
nobody talks about that.
First, he doesn't talk